Welcome to the MHS Wood Shop. Today we're going to walk through the table saw. The table saw is an important piece of equipment that will be found on any job site or any shop in industrial tech wood settings. So the table saw is a critical piece of equipment that we use for cutting boards down to length and down to width. It has two basic operations, one called a rip cut and one called a cross cut. Now the table saw has a bad reputation for being a dangerous piece of equipment, but if used correctly and safely, it's an easy operation that is really efficient at getting the job done. It's made up of a few basic parts. We have a table, we have what's called a rip fence, we have a miter gauge, we have two adjustments, one on the front of the saw for raising and lowering the blade, one on the side of the saw for setting an angle left and right, and we have our start button and our emergency stop. Now the saw works by a motor driving a circular saw blade in a direction that comes at us, which is where the safety part comes into play. And it also utilizes a set of guards and splitters that do two things. They keep your fingers out of the saw blade, and they keep your cut groove open throughout the process so that you don't get what's called kickback. Now when we want to operate the saw, we need a few tools to do this safely. I always use a tri-square so that I can ensure that my blade is set perpendicular to the table so I get a clean cut. I use something called a push pad so I can hold on to the surface of the board and push it through the blade, keeping my fingers safely out of the way. And something called a push stick. The push stick extends my arm, and it keeps my hands and my arm free of the blade throughout the process so I can push it all the way across the table. When we want to make a safe cut using the table saw, there's just a few simple steps we follow and a few procedures so we can use it safely. So we get our material. First we figure out what is the width or the length we want our material to be, and we need to figure out, are we cutting with the grain of the board or across the grain of the board. If we're cutting with the grain, we're going to use what's called the rip fence. Now we have just a couple rules when we're making our cuts. Anytime our hands are going to be within 4 inches of the blade, we need to utilize our push stick and our push pads. So to keep your fingers out of the way whenever possible. First thing you'll do is put your material up to the side of the blade, and we're going to adjust our gauge so that the blade is about 1/4 of an inch above the material. Next thing I'll do is I'll take my layout mark, I will line it up with the blade, and I will adjust my rip fence appropriately with the guided gauge on the front of the saw, as well as the mark that I made on my board. At that point, we lock down the rip fence, we utilize our push stick, and we hold our board square and flush to the fence all the way through our cut. Before you make your cut, you need to make sure your equipment is plugged in, everything is safely out of the way, and when we go to turn on our blade, we have our board away from the cutting surface so that we can guide the material into the blade all the way through, and then we release the material, we shut off the machine, and when it stops running, then we can grab our cut.